Playing a pure mage in Skyrim can be daunting. The permutations of skills, perks, spells, and enchantments to master seem nearly infinite. Even more so with gameplay overhauls and spell pack mods in the mix. So the main challenge of the pure mage build is really just managing all of these aspects and grouping and using them in ways that reflect a coherent gameplay flow that is easy to understand and, more importantly, fun to play. And that's exactly what I'll show you in this video. Over the course of this build guide, I'll go over the key mods I used and how to best leverage them. If you're a vanilla player, you may find some useful info or inspiration as well, so don't click away just yet. We'll then look at race, skills, and birthsign. Then I'll go over the standing stones and religion I used in this build, followed by attributes ratio and an in-depth look at the perks I used. Then we'll look at the enchanted gear I used on both my character and my follower, followed by a deep dive into the spells and shouts I used for the playthrough, both modded and vanilla. Then it's story time with a discussion about the roleplay I used in the playthrough. And we'll end the video with everyone's favorite part, the gameplay combos. Here I'll show you the coolest, most novel, and interesting synergies and combos I found during my playthrough. And like always, I'll mark all of these chapters so you can skip around if you want. By the way, if you end up enjoying this video, please do hit the like and subscribe buttons, and consider checking out the rest of the channel for more builds like this. It's free, and it helps the channel a ton. I am using the full Skyrim overhaul mods for this one, so here are the key mods. Ordinator for the perks, Apocalypse and Odin for the spells, and Summer Mist for expanded enchantments. Optional mods that made the playthrough more fun for me were Winter Sun for religion and Imperius for better racial traits, as well as Sky UI for the equip sets in order to get both spells and a shout equipped with one hotkey. And that's really it for the key mods for this build. I'll have all of these mods linked in the description below, and as always, let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions for other mods. For the race, I chose Altmer. It's not the most interesting choice for a pure mage, I know, but it is kind of a no-brainer best in slot choice. We have little need for armor rating since we don't wear any, so the boost to enchantments we get from the Shimmering Threads passive with Imperius is simply a free buff. The Imperius Altmer's unlockable ability Contingency allows us to cast any known spell for free hooked to a variety of triggers. You can unlock this skill by catching 40 butterflies, which really is not as many as it sounds. Early on, before I had a sufficient magicka pool, I used the Raise Hands trigger to cast high-level summons at will. Later on, when I had the magicka to cast any spell I wanted, I hooked fast healing up to the below 25% health trigger, and this literally saved the character's life on several occasions. For the class, I focused on all the magic skills, so Alteration, Conjuration, Destruction, Illusion, Restoration, and Enchanting. I'll go over perks in a later section, but these skills gave me all the tools I needed, and then some, to play on legendary difficulty through the whole playthrough. And for those of you who are also using classic classes in Birthsigns Reimagined, I chose the Mage Birthsign. This gives you a starting 30-point boost to magicka, helping you to cast many apprentice level spells right away. For Standing Stone, I picked the Mage Stone to help me level the magic skills early, and I kept it through the whole playthrough. Not only does it give you a 10% boost to progression rate in all mage skills, but it also makes all mage skills 10% stronger, which means 10% stronger destruction, restoration, and illusion spells, and 10% longer active time for conjuration and alteration spells. And its unlockable once per day power for finding all standing stones is a choice of one of 3 random spell schools to make 100% stronger and have the magicka cost for. This is amazing for boss fights, and since the mage is proficient in all spell schools, they'll have something in their toolkit that they can use for whatever spell school you choose. The Atronach Stone is also a strong choice here. Instead of regenerating magicka naturally, you absorb magicka from dead enemies. This is an inconvenience if you're not killing enemies quickly. However, in return you get a huge 25% boost to amplitude of all spells, and all spells cost half as much. I spec'd this build to lower costs and strengthen magicka regen to keep all options available at all times, but I really can't fault your logic if you feel like this is a better choice. The Apprentice Stone is also a solid choice. All spells cost 15% less magicka to cast, and novice spells are free, which is amazing early in the playthrough, but less useful later on. There is a 75% chance that the spell you cast will be 50% stronger, and a 25% chance that it'll be 50% weaker. This does mean spells will be more powerful overall, but I don't like playing games of chance typically. On paper, this is great, but in practice, it'll be more divisive. Another great thing about this stone is the once per day power, which grants you a saving roll from a fatal attack for 30 seconds, instead vaporizing your attacker. Overall, I can't fault you for taking this choice either, just know what you're getting into. For religion, I went with Ariel. Boosting level 100 skills by 10% of your favor was too much to ignore. This means an extra 20 levels of destruction, illusion, and restoration at max favor. With mastery perks in those skills, that means top-end destruction damage and illusion and restoration strength. This is huge for legendary difficulty at high levels. There are many other choices for deity here, especially for Altmer, that work really nicely with mages. Admittedly, I haven't actually played with many of them, so please drop a comment below with your favorite Winter Sun deity for mage characters. Let's get educated here. Attribute distribution was really simple, with 4 points in magicka, 1 point in health, and none in stamina for every 5 levels. Obviously this means we'll be very squishy at all levels, but we'll be getting plenty of defense from other means that I'll discuss later in the video. At some point though, you'll feel like you have enough magicka and enchanted gear to cast everything you want to cast. At that point, feel free to start pouring more points into health for survivability. Alright, let's dive into perks now, starting with Alteration. Go ahead and take both ranks of Alteration Mastery. This will make all Alteration spells cheaper and last longer. Geomancer is great for an extra 30% in damage reduction while casting. Ritualist allows us to move while charging master level ritual spells, making them much more useful and accessible in combat. I took Alter Self Resistances and chose Fire and Frost Resistance to help with dragon encounters, and Alter Self Attributes to tack another 50 points to the magicka pool. I also took all 3 ranks of Mage Armor for stronger flesh spells and more armor rating, which then opens up Distorted Shape. This is a very important perk that makes us invulnerable for 10 seconds the first time we gain a flesh spell in combat. This keeps us safe while our minions gain aggro from our enemies. I also use this mechanic in gameplay combos later on in this video. Energy Shield gives a hefty 35% resistance to elemental and physical attack damage as long as you have at least 50% magicka in the tank. This is a key ingredient in survivability for the Pure Mage, especially since we're dealing with such low health numbers. Wild Shrines is an important perk because it strengthens each spell school by amplifying it instead of reducing its cost. Check the links in the description for a video showing the locations of all of these shrines on the map. I also grabbed Wellok's Dormant Arcana. I hooked up Empower Destruction, Regenerate Magicka, and Magicka Resistance to conjure Daedra spells. You can hook these to flesh spells as well, but since I'm running Edge of Oblivion with this build, I pretty much always have a minion active anyway. Moving on to Conjuration, I took both ranks of Mastery. This makes minions cheaper to cast and longer lasting. Then I took Plane Meld, but only so I could get to Atromancy, which triples the active time for all conjurations. I also took Pact Magic, which boosts destruction spells by 10% while a minion is near. And the key perk here is Edge of Oblivion, which allows you a second minion. The trade-off is that while you don't have an active minion, you lose 250 armor rating and 50% magic resistance. So it's imperative that you always have minions active going into any potential combat situation. And during a fight, if you lose a minion, make it a priority to conjure a new one as soon as possible. Leveling beyond 50, you might consider the level 100 perk March of Oblivion. This will give you extra minion counts based on magicka pool, which at this point will be sizable. It'll cost you several other perk points and perks that you may not find useful, but it could be worth it for an army of Daedra to do your bidding. Now, for destruction, you'll have a choice to make. In my mind, there are 2 ways to go here. You can either concentrate on shock magic and completely fill out that subtree for super strong shock spells, or you can spread those perks out across all elemental subtrees. Or if you want to get a little crazy, you can also focus solely on frost or fire. The reason shock is preferred here is because it is the least resisted element amongst all common enemy types. Nords in Skyrim are resistant to frost, and Dunmer in Solstheim are resistant to flame. Frost and flame dragons are highly resistant to their own element, but shock spells are generally equally effective against the vast majority of enemies. Let me know in the comments which element you like best and why you feel that way. If you do decide to specialize in a single element, you definitely should spend a perk on the dual casting perks. It will significantly strengthen your damage output and give you expanded opportunities for proccing powerful additional effects in the elemental perk subtrees. All that being said, I went with the thinner spread over all elemental subtrees. I just feel like this build is at its best with a wide array of options. I genuinely enjoyed picking out which spells were going to be best for each dungeon dive based on enemy resistance type and having strong options for every situation. So I took both ranks of Destruction Mastery, which helps destruction damage scale with skill level all the way into the late game. Robe of the Magi gives you a massive 30% boost to destruction damage as long as you're not wearing armor, which we aren't. But you have to take the Force of Nature perk to get there, which is far less useful for this build. Still worth it, in my opinion. In the Flame subtree, I took both ranks of Combustion, which makes flame spells up to 30% more powerful based on the target's missing health, and Scarring Burns, which reduces the target's fire resistance for 5 seconds whenever they're hit with a flame spell. In the Frost subtree, I took both ranks of Merciless Cold, which makes frost spells up to 30% more powerful based on the target's missing stamina, and Frostfall, which reduces attack damage of targets by 25% for 5 seconds whenever they're hit with a frost spell. And finally, in the Shock subtree, I took both ranks in Ionized Path, which makes shock spells up to 30% stronger based on the target's missing magicka, and Static Field, which always takes the target down to at least 75% health if they already have at least that much, making shock spells a great way to open offense. Okay, now on to Illusion. As with everything else, I took both ranks of Mastery to make all illusion spells stronger and cheaper, scaling with level. And then I took only what was needed to get the Master of the Mind perk so that illusion spells are effective against all enemy types, be they Draugr, Automata, or just regular old people. This required spending perk points on Dream Thief and Fickle Fate, which were less useful for this build, but very much worth it to be able to use illusion spells on everything. I wasn't able to find anything I couldn't Calm, Fear, or Fury other than super high level bosses and dragons, of course. There are tons of other perks here that are worth taking, but I worked hard to make this a level 50 build, and many of these perks just didn't make the cut. However, if you're leveling beyond 50, you might consider taking the Commanding Presence subtree, which will vastly strengthen your followers and minions. Okay, moving on to Restoration, you'll definitely want to take both ranks of Restoration Mastery, making all restoration spells stronger and cheaper. I also took Descending Light, which provides very rapid magicka regen at the beginning of each fight. And I also took Vigilant, which makes the first ward cast in battle free for as long as it is active. This helped immensely with tanking Dragon Breath attacks and mage groups while minions and followers provide physical attack damage. Restoration is another tree where there are tons of useful perks, but since this is a level 50 build, I had to pick the essentials. Beyond level 50, Spirit Tutors will give you a nice boost to restoration spell strength, scaling with magicka, of which we have tons. And the Warrior's Flame subtree will keep the party's magicka and stamina levels topped off, and with a later perk, health as well. Next up is the all-important crafting skill, Enchanting. This is what will ultimately take this build over the top and ensure high-level dominance of most enemies on legendary difficulty. I took both ranks of Enchanting Mastery for stronger enchantments. I also took Gem Dust, which allows you to spend a flawless gem in your inventory to make enchantments during that session 25% stronger. Regalia makes enchantments placed on robes, circlets, hoods, and necklaces 30% stronger. Attunement makes all existing enchantments 10% stronger when equipped. This stacks with the 15% boost to enchantments Altmer get from the Shimmering Threads racial passive with the Imperious mod. Twin Enchantments is a very important perk that allows us to double the amount of enchantments we can put on each piece of gear. And Arcane Nexus allows you to upgrade an enchanting table for another 25% permanent boost to new enchantments at that station. Beyond level 50, you might consider the Miracle perk, which is a one-time use perk that boosts enchantments by another 25% and allows you a third enchantment on that item. Only take this once you've fully considered how you'll use it, because as mentioned, it's only good for your very next enchantment and then it's gone. And that does it for the perks. Let me know in the comments if I missed any important ones that you usually take for a Pure Mage character and why you think they're important. We can work together to make our builds better. Since we're investing heavily in the enchanting tree for this build, gear is really important and a bit more complex than some of the other builds. We'll be self-enchanting most of our gear, but there are a few unique items to chase down that'll give us some more top-end oomph on elemental destruction damage. First up, the armor set I'm using in the video footage is the Avaloq Robes set from the Divine Elegance mod. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. I also used Warmonger's Armory to move Dragon Priest masks down to the belt for mostly aesthetic purposes. This does open up the head slot for more enchantments and allows you to have 2 belt-fastened masks equipped at once. So it does add power, but you can easily just wear the mask on your head if you're sensitive to balance. I also put a link to Warmonger's Armory in the description below. Okay, let's dive into the combat equipment and enchantments I ended up with. For the head slot on the hood, I had a Fortified Destruction enchantment, reducing casting costs by 78%, and a Magicka regen enchantment for 198% regen. These aren't totally necessary though, so you can replace this with the Azadal, Dukan, or Zakrisos masks to amplify fire, frost, or shock spells respectively. You can switch them out in real time if you want to use all of them, or just keep one in place if you're going to specialize in a single element. I like to clip these to my belt though with the Warmonger's Armory mod, mainly for aesthetic reasons. These masks are important because they are one of the few sources of destruction effect amplification in the game, and at high character and difficulty levels, every bit of top-end damage output you can get is worth it. Speaking of top-end damage, on the robes I had an Amplified Destruction effect for 59% stronger destruction spells. I also had an Area of Effect enchantment that decreased magic resistance of all enemies within 98 feet by 25%. Both of these bump up damage output by a good chunk and are provided by the Summer Mist mod, link in the description below. On the boots, I had Resist Fire and Frost enchantments, both of which took me to the 85% cap on those. On the amulet, I put the Amplify Minion effect, making all conjured minions within 98 feet 25% stronger with physical attacks, and an extra 100 health to tank with. I also put another Fortified Destruction enchantment on it, which combined with the Hood's enchantment let me cast any destruction spell completely for free. On the ring, I placed the Resist Shock enchantment, taking us to the 85% cap for that element as well, and a Fortify Illusion effect that gives us a 60% reduction in Magicka cost for those spells. There is a very strong argument here to use Azadal's Ring of Arcana, which provides access to the Ignite spell. This is basically the strongest destruction spell in the game as it indefinitely stacks long-lasting fire damage over time. You aren't going to have quite the burst damage ability to instantly nuke weaker enemies, as there are other spells that deal much more immediate damage, but for enemies with extremely large health pools, the stacking fire damage from Ignite will eventually outpace every other spell in terms of DPS. In my time playing this character, I preferred the immediate damage of the higher level destruction spells, especially with damage boosted by the various enchantments and the bonkers amplitudes on some of the Fortified Destruction potions I mixed up. I found that I was destroying most enemies much faster with these more conventional spells than with the slow burning Ignite spell. Pick your own favorite though, because both are completely viable with this build. Speaking of potions, I did also have a separate set of gear for crafting. This set was used both for mixing extremely powerful potions, such as the Fortified Destruction potions mentioned, and for tempering weapons and armor for our follower. More on that in a bit. For the crafting gear on the circlet, I ended up with a 70% boost to alchemy. I also used the Summer Mist enchant to prolong alchemical effects, extending them by 132%. This just helps you to not have to rush your crafting sessions to fit into the tiny potion effect windows. On the robes, I had a 70% boost to smithing and another 132% potion time extension for longer crafting sessions. The gloves got a 54% boost to both alchemy and smithing. On the boots, I put carrying capacity and movement speed to haul those massive quantities of materials around from station to station. The amulet got a 70% boost to both alchemy and smithing, and the ring got a 54% boost to both alchemy and smithing. The circlet, hood, robes, and amulets all have higher values due to the Regalia perk mentioned previously, which further boosts the enchantments on these specific item types. Also, while I didn't do any dedicated endgame crafting loops to obtain these values, I did periodically upgrade my crafting set as I felt my current enchantments getting weaker. So your mileage may vary on these values, but these numbers ended up sufficient for me on legendary difficulty up to and beyond level 50, and required no exploits or grinding. at least none after reaching level 100 in all crafting skills, which really should be happening for every character anyway, regardless of perk investment. Okay, let's talk about potions. The main one here is the Fortify Destruction potion. Unlike the Fortify Destruction enchantment, which reduces the cost of destruction spells, Fortify Destruction potions actually strengthen the spells. These are super duper important for damage output on mage characters. In the vanilla game, this is the only way to augment the damage of your spells, and even in the Skyrim overhauls, the opportunities to scale destruction damage is limited. But as always, alchemy comes to the rescue. With our strong enchanted crafting gear, I was getting Fortify Destruction potions with huge temporary damage boosts. I also stocked up on ultimate healing and ultimate magicka potions whenever I could find them at a vendor or in random loot. I hotkeyed both, but really didn't use them much. With the magicka regen enchantments and descending light perk, my magicka usually came back by the time I needed it again, and the cost reduction for destruction spells through Fortify Destruction enchantments helped immensely as well. I also made some Fortify Illusion potions, which increases the NPC level that you can affect with the spells, but I never actually used any of them throughout the course of this playthrough. The perks discussed in that section were plenty for me to apply Calm, Fury, and Fear effects to any enemy I encountered. I'm sure there are some exceptions at high levels, so it might be wise to keep a few of these on you just in case. If you're running Hunterborn with the Corporeal Dragon setting turned on, the ideal recipe for Fortified Destruction potions is Eye of Dragon with Glowing Mushroom. This netted me a whopping 273% damage bonus with my crafting gear. If you don't have Hunterborn or are short on Dragon Eyes, but you do have the free Rare Curios creation bundled with the AE update, you can make a potion with Daedra Venom and Glowing Mushroom for a nice 164% destruction damage boost. But Daedra Venom is rare and hard to find, so if you have the full paid AE upgrade or at least the Goblin's creation, you can acquire Steel Blue Entaloma, which is cheap, always available at Khajiit caravans, and even plantable in your Hearthfire home. Mixed with a Glowing Mushroom, this one gave me a still great 136% damage boost. And finally, if you don't have the Goblin's creation, you can also use Nightshade, which is abundantly available pretty much everywhere, though it does have a 20% penalty to the amplitude of the effect in the resulting potion. At least if you haven't modded that penalty out like I did. Still, this would give me a 109% damage boost to destruction spells, which is not ideal, but absolutely far better than nothing. As mentioned, Steel Blue Entaloma can be planted in your Hearthfire home, but so can Glowing Mushroom and Nightshade, giving you an endless supply of these potions. So make sure to plant these ingredients, mix these potions, and most importantly, use them up. You can always easily make more, so don't feel like you have to be stingy with them. Okay, let's talk about our follower. With the mage, your follower is really important early in the game when you only have access to one weak conjured minion, and your damage output isn't up to snuff yet. They make for great meat shields, they do really good damage, especially on legendary difficulty, and they can carry all your loot since without any stamina investment, you won't be able to carry much of it yourself. But having a follower also gives you access to weapon enchantments that a pure mage won't or can't use, or at least shouldn't be using. I chose the Falkreath Housecarl Raya since her AI can dual wield one-handed weapons right out of the box. This was important for me so I could enchant Weakness to Frost and Fire on one blade, and Weakness to Poison and Shock to the other. And with each attack, Raya would make the enemy weaker to any of the spell types I'd want to use against them. These weakness enchantments are available in Summer Mist version 4 in case you're running an older version and not seeing them. On the rest of her gear, I just placed basic Fortify Health, Stamina, One-Handed, and Heavy Armor enchantments to make her stronger and tougher in battle. Alright, so let's talk about spells. I probably ended up using most, if not all, spells between the vanilla game, all expansions, the paid AE upgrade, Odin, and Apocalypse. Most of them were useful in some capacity, but some were obviously meant more for some sort of hybrid spell sword or Nightblade playstyle. Still, there were some that I kept coming back to, and those are the ones I'll be focusing on here. If I missed one of your favorite spells, let me know which one and how you use it in the comments below. Alteration is the first alphabetically, so let's start there. I always had a flesh spell hooked up to Okado's Recital. This was always the highest level spell I could buy since it would be cast for free at the beginning of every battle anyway. Ebony Flesh would give us 100 armor rating, which on legendary difficulty was often enough to survive a physical attack when other defenses wore down. But the real value of these flesh spells was the Distorted Shape perk mentioned earlier in the video. This would give us 10 seconds of invulnerability at the start of every battle, which allowed plenty of time for our minions to take aggro from our enemies and to set up powerful long lead ritual spells to open combat. Just make sure you don't hook anything else up to Okado's Recital, since a subsequent autocast of another spell will cancel the Distorted Shape invulnerability effect pretty much immediately and make that perk worthless. Tumble Magnet is an expert level spell from Apocalypse that periodically draws all enemies into it. I combined this with the elemental wall spells in the Destruction School for lots of damage over time on multiple enemies. I also made use of the Mass Paralysis spell. Distorted Shape gives us safe entry into a group of enemies and enough invulnerability to complete the long casting time of this ritual spell. Once cast, the prolonged paralysis effect allows us to combo into other master level ritual spells such as Firestorm and Blizzard for some massive damage. I also use the Deep Storage spell quite often to store loot during adventures. Since we make no attribute investment in stamina, our carry weight will be very low and we'll be using enchantment slots to boost our damage output, so this very much came in handy. Okay, on to Conjuration. For this level 50 build, I relied on the Edge of Oblivion perk for one extra minion, which honestly was plenty for pretty much everything I needed to do on legendary difficulty. Beyond level 50, you may consider taking the March of Oblivion perk, which adds more minions based on magical pool size. Since the Pure Mage is a glass cannon ranged build, I typically used melee summons to gain aggro and distract enemies from attacking me. So the vast majority of the time I use the Dremora Honor Guard. This expert level summon uses a Daedric Greatsword and further reduces magic resistance of enemies in the area by 25%, which makes our mage even more deadly. In situations where melee was ineffective or where enemies were typically out of reach for some reason, I used the Dremora Assassin Master level summon. The Assassin's arrows will reduce any enemy with less than 250 HP down to 1 HP. I also used Daedric Crescent on the Honor Guard, which staggers enemies when hit for extra crowd control. Power of the Master is an apprentice level spell that casts the beneficial self-cast spell in the left hand on all summoned minions. I typically used Frost Cloak here to slow enemies for easy targeting. Okay, on to Destruction now. I typically used basic expert level destruction spells for general damage output. These were Incinerate for fire spells against undead, Icy Spear against human melee enemies, and Thunderbolt against mages, and just general purpose damage as most enemies don't resist it anyway. As mentioned, I also did use Frost Cloak to slow melee enemies. This helped for both easier targeting and to gain or maintain distance from these enemies. I made use of the different elemental wall spells, which I combined with Tumble Magnet to dish out lots of damage over time against large groups of enemies. I did also use the master level spells Firestorm and Blizzard, typically after landing mass paralysis on a large group of enemies. For Illusion, I tried to keep things pretty basic. I used Bravery before combat to buff my followers and minions, and during battle, I'd use Rage or Dominate to cause some battlefield chaos for more crowd control. And finally, on to Restoration, I made heavy use of the Greater Ward from Odin, and it withstood pretty much every high-level Dragon Breath and Mage attack that was thrown at it. It's a great tool against pretty much any ranged spell, shout, or Dragon Breath attack. You just have to make sure you're pointing it in the right direction. I also used Grand Healing as needed, and I had Fast Healing hooked up to the Altmer Contingency power, set to be triggered when my health dipped below 25%. Although it's only an apprentice level spell, restoration scaling along with our low health pools make this really effective. This literally saved my life on many occasions. I'll touch on more combos and synergies later on in the gameplay combos section, so stay tuned for that. Also, make sure to check the links in the description for a guide on using the Sky UI equip sets, which made switching between spells and shouts in different combat phases a breeze for this character. As with other basic classes, roleplay for the Pure Mage is pretty wide open. There are tons of examples in popular media to follow, or at least get inspiration from. There's also tons of room to get a little crazy and go off the rails with something uniquely original. In any case, I'll walk you through the roleplay I used for this character, which might give you some ideas on how to manage your own playthrough. So for this section, I'll go through the backstory, motivations, and actions taken that define this character and set him apart from being just another mage playthrough. Calendil's parents were monks in the Psijic Order. He idolized them for their mastery of the magical arts, and also for the respect this station afforded them amongst others. He looked up to them, but so did everyone else. So he studied hard and was driven to excel so that one day he might be accepted into their ranks. And excel he did. Calendil had the talent, the skill, and the ambition to stand out amongst his peers and other aspiring mages. He learned new magic faster than anyone else and quickly came to apply it in creative ways that never occurred to others. He did everything right, and surely if anyone would be invited to join the elite ranks of the Psijic, it would be Calendil. And yet, small seeds of doubt were ever present, leading to roots of insecurity, which led to a blossoming tree of motivation to always do better. And those doubts were not unfounded. Every year that passed without an invitation to join his parents simply fed his obsessive tenacity even further. He'd tirelessly study and practice, always leaving his fellow students far behind, and yet still no invitation. In his mind, he wasn't smart enough, not powerful enough, not studious enough. Simply not perfect enough, and so this fueled his tireless pursuit of power indefinitely. And then the Psijic Order just vanished without a trace, no word from his parents or anyone else. They just left, which further ignited his feelings of inadequacy. And so he left to search Tamriel, search for power, wisdom, knowledge, or any sign of his parents and the rest of the Psijic Order. Just one small message or hint of what to do to earn their grace, but that never came until... Finding his way to the College of Winterhold in Skyrim, he happened upon a strange glowing orb in a Nordic ruin. The Eye of Magnus, he'd learned it to be called. While he could feel an extreme amount of power and importance in this artifact, he knew not what it was meant to be used for or even how to wield it. The Thalmor dignitary by the name of Ancano, who had every bit the ambition Calendil had, but perhaps a fraction of his talent, did learn to wield the orb, at least partially. Calendil managed to defeat Ancano handily enough, and was finally greeted by the Psijic Order. He thought surely this was the moment he'd waited a lifetime for. Surely this would be the feat that earned him passage to the Isle of Artaeum, into the open arms of his beaming parents. But the invitation never came, no acknowledgement of his desires, not even a word from his parents. But it was not in Calendil's nature to feel defeated. This simply led to even more ambition to become even more powerful and perform even greater feats. He saved Nirn from Alduin the World Eater, from powerful vampires attempting to blot out the sun, from the tyranny of an ancient and powerful dragon priest named Marak, and countless other potential apocalypses. All in the hopes of finally being good enough for the Psijic Order, or at least to prove them wrong for their rejection. But for all of his intelligence and knowledge, we know what Calendil does not. His parents cared deeply for their son, and selfishly wanted him to join them on Artaeum. But they were wise beyond measure and knew that a lifetime of insecurity and doubt would fuel their beloved son to accomplish amazing feats in his life. Feats that the world would need in order to survive. Feats that even the Psijics could not perform, or would flat out refuse to do in an attempt to observe but not interfere. So, the cost of saving the world from the countless existential threats of this age was the happiness and contentment of 3 Altmer. 2 proud and loving parents that were destined to shun their only child, and their offspring that was fated to tirelessly strive for parental approval that he could never obtain. Not exactly a happy ending, but hey, Nirn gets to keep spinning, right? And now for everyone's favorite part, the gameplay combos. The potential combos and synergies for this archetype are seemingly endless. The combination of Ordinator and Apocalypse have long been a favorite of build crafters, and we've seen many creative builds come from these mods. So there are lots of possibilities here that I won't be able to identify in just one section of one video, but please do sound off in the comments sharing your favorite combos from these classic overhauls. Here are a few cool ones that I found to be fun and effective on legendary difficulty. Oblivion Empowered is a pre-combat preparation combo that I use to power up my summons. Typically, I'd use the Dremora Honor Guard for this, as they are strong melee fighters and reduce magic resistance of nearby enemies. Once they're active, I'd cast Daedric Crescent on each of them to provide crowd control through stagger on these bound weapons. Then I'd cast Bravery to buff all of their attributes, and Power of the Master with Frost Cloak for a bit of frost damage and to slow enemies for easier targeting. 2 Honor Guard with these buffs are typically enough to defeat all enemies for you, but they do provide the best opportunity for casting your own offensive spells in combat. Next combo is one I call Chaos Atrophy. The Distorted Shape perk will proc through Okado's Recital if you have one single flesh spell hooked up. This makes you invulnerable for a very long feeling 10 seconds. This covers us for the lengthy cast time of Mass Paralysis, which makes everyone fall down like a messed up game of Ring Around the Rosie. Then chug a Fortified Destruction Potion for boosted damage output and cast Firestorm followed by Blizzard. This is all likely overkill for most enemies you'll be fighting in the game, but hey, you wanted to feel the unchecked power of a Pure Mage, so here it is. Elemental Singularity starts by casting Tumble Magnet in the middle of a group of enemies. It's a bit of a lengthy cast time, so use Distorted Shape to cover your entry if needed. Next, take a Fortified Destruction Potion and cast Flame, Frost, or Shock Wall under the magnet. The element you choose should be based on enemy type, so Flame Wall for Undead, Frost Wall for Dunmer, and Shock Wall for Mages, or for general purpose if you don't feel like constantly choosing. Tumble Magnet will periodically pull enemies back into the area of ground affected by your wall spell, and is a fun and effective way of clearing out large groups of enemies in an enclosed space. And that does it for another build. Hopefully this one will give you some ideas for your own playthrough, or at least provide some base level knowledge on how magic works in Skyrim, so we can build better, more unique hybrid builds in the future. I look forward to sharing my own builds and can't wait to see what you all cook up. In the meantime, please do like the video and subscribe for more. It helps the channel and motivates me to create more and better content like this. Take care.